The legend of the leprechaun is one of the most enduring in all of Irish folklore, and these magical little creatures have been part of the culture for hundreds of years. But have you ever wondered where the leprechaun actually came from? What are their origins and how did they first appear in literature? Well, today we're going to take a look at that. So grab yourself a cup of tea, sit back, and get ready to learn all about leprechauns. As I'm sure you know, leprechauns are small bearded men who are said to live at the end of rainbows and guard pots of gold. They're often depicted as wearing green hats and carrying around sticks, and they're known for their love of trickery. According to legend, leprechauns were created when the evil fairy queen, the Banshee, was banished from the fairy realm. She was sent to the mortal world as punishment for her crimes, and she was only allowed to bring one thing with her, a pot of gold. The Banshee was furious, and so she cursed the pot, causing it to be guarded by a race of tiny, grumpy men who would do her bidding. These men were the leprechauns, and they were tasked with protecting the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow until the Banshee's return. The first written mention of the leprechaun can be found in a book called The History of the Irish, written by an Irish monk named John C. O'Donovan in the 17th century. In it, he writes about a tribe of people who lived in Ireland before the arrival of the Romans. He calls them the Law, or the She, and describes them as being a race of giants who lived in the mountains and forests of Ireland. According to O'Donovan, the Law were a peaceful people who lived in harmony with nature, but they were often persecuted by the Tuatha De Danann, the main antagonist in most Irish myths. The Law were eventually driven out of Ireland and into the sea, where they became known as the Lepre-Conned. So there you have it, The Legend of the Leprechaun, Part 1. Be sure to stay tuned for Part 2. Did you know that the first written documentation of leprechauns was actually in a book about the Spanish Civil War? Well, if you didn't know that, now you do. But that raises a lot more questions. Like, what's a leprechaun, and why were they talking about them during the Spanish Civil War? Leprechauns are small, usually malevolent fairies that originated in Ireland. They're typically depicted as being short in stature, usually no taller than 4 feet, with a green or brown complexion, a long white beard, and a big bushy mustache. They're also known for wearing green hats, which is probably where the whole leprechaun look comes from. They live in places like caves or burrows underground, or at the root of old trees. And they spend their time making and mending shoes, which they do in the same way that elves make their toys, by using magic. Now, leprechauns aren't evil exactly, but they're not good either. They're basically just looking out for number one. They can be incredibly selfish, greedy, and malicious, but they can also be tricked into doing things that benefit humans. The most common example of this is them being tricked into giving someone the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The word leprechaun comes from the Irish word leaf, meaning half, and the word breon, meaning a fairy. So leprechaun literally means half fairy. This is fitting because in a lot of stories, they're described as being the offspring of a human, and a fairy, which gives them the ability to interact with the mortal world in a way that other fairies can't. As for how old leprechauns are, it depends on the story. Sometimes they're ageless, existing outside of time as it is known. Other times they're just as old as the hills or the trees that they live in. There's even one story where a leprechaun is cursed to be 100 years old, and to die on Christmas Day every year until he's eventually forgotten and turns into a tree spirit. As far as the look of the leprechauns, there's some stories where they have pointed ears like elves, while in others they look more like bearded dwarfs. In modern depictions, we tend to lean more towards the bearded dwarf look. If you want to know when the leprechaun first appeared in writing, well, that would be in 1937 in a book about the Spanish Civil War. The author, an Irish poet named Patrick Kavanagh, wrote a poem called The Lepre-Conne's Gold. It was during the war, though, that people started telling stories about leprechauns to boost morale. After all, what's more Irish than leprechauns and rainbows? That doesn't really answer the question, though. Why were they talking about leprechauns during the Spanish Civil War? Well, the answer is pretty simple. During wartime, people cling to whatever makes them happy. And if that thing happens to be leprechauns, then so be it. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe for another tale from history. Thanks for watching.